You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Those of you who listen to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour on a regular basis know that the Dixie Heritage Letter, our weekly free newsletter, has thousands of interesting subscribers, and every week we give you the opportunity to meet another one of them. Today's guest is Dr. David Baker. He is a pastor and a jail chaplain in Columbia, Tennessee. That's near the headquarters of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And Dr. Baker sent me a copy of his book on child rearing God's way. And the title definitely intrigued me, and I sat down and I read it, and I thought, wow, this is a great book. There are some great principles in this book that we need to share with our listeners on TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. And so I called Dr. Baker, and I asked him if he'd be a guest on our show today, and he agreed. Of course, one of the things that I found out when I had read Dr. Baker's book was that he and I had gone to college together. I say that actually he graduated the year before I became a freshman, and we just missed each other in college, but we went to the same college. We had a lot of the same professors. We knew a lot of the same people. We lived in a lot of the same places. Our story is very common. And the truth is that I probably knew David when I was a teenager and just didn't realize it because I was hanging around the college as a teenager even before I became a student there when I was still in high school. And we went to the same church. It was a very large church. And so again, our paths might not have intersected directly so that we would have remembered one another's names, but we were there. And so looking back at it now, I may faintly remember David, and we talk about that a little bit in the interview, but it was great to get to know him. One of the things you'll see is at the beginning of the interview is David and I are just kind of chatting, talking about our past, our college experiences, our childhoods, getting to know each other a little bit before we get into the subject matter of today's interview. Normally I would edit that kind of thing out, but the reason I left it in today is because it gives you an opportunity to get to know me a little bit better. It also gives you an opportunity to get to know our guest just a little bit better. So I left some of that in the beginning. For those of you who just absolutely don't want to listen to those kinds of chatter, you can always fast forward about 5 minutes and you can get to the heart of our discussion. And the heart of our discussion is, how do we pass our faith down to the next generation? How do we pass our culture down to the next generation? How do we pass our heritage and our history down to the next generation? And the reason that this is important is because we're losing our country. We're losing our culture. We're losing our heritage. And I think you realize that, and that's why you're a regular listener to a program like this. But how do we turn that around? I mean, we often complain that the liberals are taking our heritage away from us because they took down another monument or another statue or another flag. And of course, we know that those monuments and those statues and those flags are not our culture, are not our history, are not our heritage. They're just the symbols of our culture and our history and our heritage. Our culture and our history and our heritage was the Christian faith of our ancestors. It was the ideals of our ancestors. It was the political philosophy of our ancestors. It was the character and the work ethic of our ancestors. And so how do we pass those things down to the next generation? How do we pass those things down to our children so that even if every last monument is torn down, of the Southern culture and the Christian culture and heritage of the South is not lost, because our children will carry it on just as we're carrying it on, just as our parents passed it on to us, and just as their parents passed it on to them. And so that's the purpose of today's discussion, and that's why I've asked David to be our guest today. And that's why we have our discussion on child raising and child training and child rearing, if you will. And of course, David brings that to us from a biblical perspective. The wisest man that ever lived, King Solomon, had a lot to say about child training and about child rearing, and we would do well to heed his instruction. And so let's just dive right into it, our interview with Dr. David Baker.
So God bless you, man. Thanks for reaching out. And man, I'd heard of your name before and then looked at the college and stuff. Man, you guys are doing some great stuff. That's amazing. How long's the college been there?
Since 1995.
Wow. And so, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I'll tell you just a little bit of the story. I literally traveled the country the internet probably didn't become prevalent until 95.
Right.
But there were a couple guys I was going to school with, and we were playing around on bulletin boards in 1993.
Wow.
Putting courses on the bulletin boards just to see if it could be done. And in 1995, I literally traveled the country trying to find a preacher, a church, a school that would pick this up. And nobody wanted it.
I bet. Nobody had a vision back then for any of that stuff.
Nobody did. And I hadn't even graduated yet. I say that I had my bachelor's degree. I didn't quite have my master's degree yet.
Right.
And I was Dr. Lee Robertson. I took Dr. Lee Robertson to lunch. And he looked at me and he asked me, he said, "Did you pray about it?" I said, "Well, yes, sir." He said, "And what did the Lord tell you to do?" I said, well, what do you mean? He said, "Well, is the Lord telling you to do this?" I said, "Yes, sir. That's why I'm traveling the country trying to find somebody to do this." And he said, "Well, if God's telling you to do it, then why are you traveling around the country trying to find another preacher to do it?"
Amen.
And I'm like, I haven't even finished my degree yet. And he told me, he said, "But you will. You will."
Yeah.
And he said, "If God told you to do this, then do it." So I went home and I did it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is awesome. No, I love it. And, now people are now just picking up on that, and of course all the colleges are going online and putting that together. I remember I led a guy to Christ police officer. His wife did websites, and it's back in, we started church in 93, so it was probably 94 or 95. And she said, "Hey, Pastor, can I do a website for the church? I want to show people what I can do, and I'll do it for free." I said, "You want to do a what? A website for a church? Why would it?" And I didn't want to offend her, and it was free. So I said, "Okay, go ahead." And so, she did, and just like, amazing. It looked neat, but, I didn't think anybody, was using it. And we had a real sharp family come to our church, and for about 30 minutes away, I'd never visited them. I said, "How did you find our church?" "Oh, yeah, I found it online." And you did? "Yeah, I did an internet search," and, it wasn't Google back then, but did an internet search, and your church came up. And I said, "What did you search?" He said, "Well, I got called to preach when I was a teenager, got away from God. I remember this preacher named Jack Hiles." He said, "I wonder if he's still out there." He said, "So I Googled Jack Hiles, and your church came up." Like, wow, they're only 30 minutes from us. And, deacon, Sunday school teacher, soul winner, amazing family. Like, okay, this got something to it. But, it was back when people, do you want to do what? So that's amazing.
Well, do you want to know what Brother Hiles told me in the 90s?
He was afraid of computers. He didn't like them at all. He probably said, throw it away and go soul winning or something. So
that's about what he said. Yeah, he said all the time I was wasting on email, I could spend leading people to the Lord. But yeah,
I could see him saying that. Oh,
but one time he told me, he said computers are spooky. That was exactly what he said. Computers are spooky.
That's what he thought. He and now you couldn't imagine, without using them, and everything that's in a phone is just amazing. I mean, how many things did that phone replace that you can do? It's just unbelievable. Yeah, Brother House would really say spooky today.
Well, last year at Easter, I had a big picture for the church to see, and it was the world's first supercomputer. Which is now on display at the University of Pennsylvania, and it takes up a whole huge room.
Yeah.
And there are people in there operating it. They had to pull what looked like old telephone switchboard wires and move them around and stuff. And so you can see the size of the computer based on the people in the picture. And I said, and then I held up my iPhone, and I'm like, and this is a computer today.
Yeah. And this computer today can do how many thousand times more what that thing could. Yeah.
And kind of the point was that had you gone back and told the people back in the 1940s that they were going to hold a computer in their hand, they couldn't have wrapped their head around it.
Yeah.
And you told people in Jesus' day that someone had just risen from the dead, they couldn't wrap their head around it.
Right. Well, the Bible said knowledge shall increase. Boy, it sure has. And we see some of the prophecies to be able to everyone in the world at the same time to see the two witnesses, rise. Years ago, how in the world could that happen? Now we can see exactly how that can happen.
Yeah. So you went to Hyles Anderson College, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes,
What
sir.
years
I was
were you there?
'88. I was out of high school, went in the military. Bad background, worldly churches and stuff, and may get into that on the child ring things. And I was at Fort Bragg, paratrooper. Got in a good church at Fort Bragg. Called to preach, didn't surrender. Ran from God. God finally got my attention. Went to Bible college in '88. Graduated in '91. Went to California, youth pastor for Paul Chapel, and then went back to college, finished my master's degree, and then we came and started a church in Tennessee.
So see, we just missed each other. I was a teenager in Brother Lapina's youth department in 1988, and
Really?
went to school in went to House Anderson in '91.
Okay.
And
Yep.
so
Yep. We just graduated. I stayed one more semester. Started working my master's degree, and I was security for Brother Hiles. And he called me in and he said, "Hey, Dave, I got a place for you to go." And I never heard of Paul Chapel, but anyway, sent me out there, and yeah, it's hard to believe now. Summer will be 30 years.
Now that you say that, you look familiar. You weren't the uniformed guard at Brother House's office door.
Not often. I did every once in a while at the office door. Most of the time I was City Baptist or his house. I liked the places where I could study because I finished the 4 years in 3. And so I took 20 hours every semester. I'd wasted some years of my life and had to hurry up and get done. So most of the time I worked places where I could do my schoolwork at the same time. But I did work his door some, yes.
Okay. So, of course, you remember when Brother Hiles would tell Elaine Colston to play the national anthem, and she would play Dixie.
Yeah. So much fun. So many great memories. So now, did you grow up there? Were your parents there? How were you?
I did. School? I grew up there.
Wow.
And actually, the funny thing is my grandfather pastored State Street Baptist Church.
Really?
Down the street. You remember you drove past that a bunch of times.
Wow.
And he got there in 1957, 2 years before Brother Hiles got to Hammond. And he passed away. He was still there when he passed away in 2010.
Wow.
And so I had kind of a strange existence at Hyles Anderson College.
I bet. Wow.
When I could have gone to a Southern Baptist school, I could have got a scholarship, but my grandfather was afraid that I'd become a liberal if I went to a Southern Baptist school. And so actually, even as a teenager, when I was 13. When I was 13, I can't remember exactly. I made a comment to my grandfather as a teenager. When I was 13 years old, I'd only been saved for just a few months. And I made a comment to my grandfather at lunch one day. And he told me, he said, "Well, then why don't you just go to First Baptist and listen to Brother Hiles preach?" And I did.
Wow.
And was there for the rest of my, teenage years.
That would be an interesting. That's neat.
But I got called into Dr. Jorgensen's office one day. And I can't remember how many demerits that I received, because somebody had seen me at the Chinese restaurant in Hammond with my grandfather. And so they said that I was fellowshipping with liberals.
Oh, wow.
Because somebody saw me in the Chinese restaurant with the pastor of the Southern Baptist Church. And so I told Dr. Jorgensen that he was my grandfather. And so he said, well, you can see Brother Hiles. Brother Hiles can determine this one. And so I went and saw Brother Hiles. And Brother Hiles wrote a letter and put it in my school file that Marvin Ramsey is not a liberal, but even if he were, he's the student's grandfather, and the purpose of the school is not to separate students from their families.
Beautiful. That's sweet. Boy, I'd love to have that letter.
Yeah. But the result of that was my grandfather was able to get me invitations to preach in some of the Southern Baptist churches there in the area.
Right.
And I was able to accept them, whereas most of the other students wouldn't have been able to.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, hey man, I like your background. Of course the books, and then is that a violin and a shotgun? Is that in the background?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Normally they're not, but yeah.
That's classic. That's good. I've got an AR in the corner over there. So we just see it in the backdrop. Hey, classic. You got a books, study books, Bibles, violin, and a gun. So there you go.
But the reason I'd asked you on the show, you had written the book on child rearing,
Mm-hmm.
and I read that here not too long ago, and I appreciate you sending that to me. And I think that that's just one of the big problems that we have. Of course, churches for generations have lamented that we raise our kids in church and then they become college age and they leave, and we kind of hope maybe we'll see them again when they retire.
Yeah.
But there's that big gap in between. And, the question's always been, well, what about our kids? Even now, with Southern culture and Southern heritage, the lamentation is we're losing our heritage because the liberals are tearing down our monuments. And I've literally traveled the country speaking Sons of Confederate Veterans, United Daughters of the Confederacy. I mean, I've spoken myself hoarse at League of the South meetings, and everybody hears it, but I don't know that they truly get it, that our heritage is something that they can't take away from us, because our heritage is not a statue. It's not a flag. The flags and the statues are but the symbols of our heritage, and our heritage is actually that Christian culture and that Christian faith of our ancestors that's been passed down from generation to generation. And if we're losing our heritage, it's because we're failing to pass it down.
That's good.
And I think it's the same in the church. I'll give you an illustration of this. In a good Southern context, Bob Jones University.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Bob Jones Sr. had convictions. At best, I believe Bob Jones Jr. had standards. I think by the time Bob Jones III came around, they had a bunch of rules.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time Stephen Jones took the school over, he didn't even bother to enforce the rules anymore. And I've seen that happen at Hyles Anderson College.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen in a lot of churches. And I've seen that happen to some degree in a slightly different context in the entirety of Southern culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have to guard against as parents is that we pass down convictions and not just standards or rules. And
right.
I think in a large part your book would help parents to do that. We'll go ahead and break here for a word from our sponsor, the Barnes Review, and as soon as we're back, about 60 seconds from now, Dr. Baker will answer that question.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
It happened, the beginning of this book, we started our church in 1993. We had 3 Sunday school classes, one for the children, one for the teenagers, and one for the adults. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to teach all the adults? And you got single moms and couples and older people and younger people. And I thought, well, let me just teach on the family, because everyone has a family somewhat. And all right, I need some curriculum. So I wanted to use the Bible. Where do you use? And I thought, well, Proverbs. Yeah, that's the book written from a wise man to his son. I bet that's got some stuff in it that would be helpful. So I started just going literally verse by verse through Proverbs. And when I did, I was amazed at how many things Solomon taught his son over and over and over. A master's degree in education, the first thing they taught was that repetition is the key to learning. And so it's like, well, Solomon in all his wisdom, of course, he knew that. And so he repeated things over and over and over and over. So I started keeping track on a page just of the things that Solomon taught over and over. And I came up with 10 topics. So I preached a sermon called The Top 10 Things to Teach Your Children. And I was done. Well, then next week I found number 11, then 12, then 13, then all the way up to 52. So the full book is 52 topics, and each topic has 7 lessons for each day. So it's a full 1 year of family devotions. And so the title of that one is, my wife is finishing editing it now. She's my English, she's got a master's degree in English, so she does my editing, and so you can pre-order that now. But that one is almost done. The title is called How to Rear Rich Kids, Rich in Life, Rich Relationships, and then Rich in Finances. Of course, Solomon taught his son all about silver, gold, wealth, rubies, substance, increase, all that. But the most important thing is not the money, it's the relationships. And I think we miss so much of that. Jesus, they said that life consisteth not in the abundance of the things a man possesseth. So if life is not in the things, then life has to be in the relationships. And so to work hard on that. And as you know, there's more in the Bible on relation between man to man than there is between man to God. 6 of the 10 commandments are relationship man to man, and 4 relationship with God. So that's how it started out, and never thought I'd put it together. So the first one, I did a free book I gave out, and just a paper copy of it, called The 3 Most Important Things to Teach Our Children. And so I've asked people for years, what do you think Solomon taught his son about more than any? And of course you read the part of that, but what would have been your guess before that?
Probably about women.
About women, and
Yeah.
that's good. I can make a strong argument for that, because Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 7, most of the whole chapters are talking about women, and there's so many other verses through that. And I'm not dogmatic in it. I can make a strong topic for wisdom, for women, and then for the tongue, which is one I use because it mentioned the tongue, words, lips, speech, speaketh, almost 200 times. So that's the one I went with. But yeah, it is amazing how many times Solomon would teach over and over on the same things, and just so helpful to our children. We have 11 children, and so I love the phrase that said, you will not know if you've done a good job rearing your children until your children rear your grandchildren. I think sometimes people get proud and think, yep, I'm done, I did a good job, and I don't feel that way at all. And how much of what we instilled and taught into our children are they going to pass on to our grandchildren? Then we have a good idea of how effective we were as parents, because like you had mentioned earlier, boy, the standards, the convictions, all that changes so much, and there's nothing even left. I'm teaching something in our church now, and it is I'm going to put it in a college class because it is super simple, but it's so powerful, and it is how to develop a standard. And everyone has a standard. When people say, oh, they don't have any standards, I correct them. No, they have a standard. That may not be your standard. They may have lowered their standard. They may have dropped their standards, but they're not walking around naked all the time. They have some standard, okay? And so, but how do you develop a biblical standard? And so as a father, I have a standard for my home. As a church, we could have a standard for the church. A business owner has a standard. McDonald's has standards. They want you to wear long sleeves and not show tattoos. They want you to have only one earring in, and, things like that. They have a standard, and the authority of that business, church, family, whatever, decides that standard. So standards are set up with 4 different things. First, you have doctrine, Bible. That ought to be our first thing. Then our convictions. What of the principles of the doctrine convicts us? Then we have preferences, and we all have them. I teach on this and said, look, my preference is that nobody in our family wears an Ohio State jersey or sweatshirt or anything like that. That's my preference, okay? Now, I don't enforce that on our church, but that's my preference. Of course, they joke about that. And then our influences, okay? What influences us? The problem is most of the time, people set their standards up by their preference and their influence. And they totally throw away doctrine and convictions. And so to understand, they ought to come from doctrine, the Bible, and then what convicts us, and then our preferences and our influences. I was in the military as a paratrooper, and so the military, of course, they give you a buzz haircut in basic, but then all through airborne and 82nd, the haircut was a high and tight, and so it's like shaved on the side and a little bit on the top. Of course, that influenced me. When I got out of the Army, I still couldn't handle hair on my ears and hair on the back of my neck. It still bothered me. And so then you went to college and they had their standard. A lot of people got away from that, but my influence of the military and the Bible, where it's a shame for men to have long hair, doctrine, what convicts me, then my influences and my preferences, then that's how we make up our standard. But I've got, let's see, 4 children that are out of high school. I'll have one more next year. So far today, all of them are doing well. Tomorrow, who knows? My oldest is 26. He works with me as a chaplain at the jail. The first book I wrote was for the jail ministry. I preached in the jail for 23 years because when I was running from God, Dr. Ed, I had to spend one night in jail. God called me to preach. I didn't want to preach, so I skipped church and went to the beach, and God said, no, you're not. And he put me in jail for the night. And so for 23 years, I've gone to our county jail to volunteer and wrote a book. And I told the guys forever, guys, I'll let you pick the title of the book that I'm writing. They're like, what? Why are you going to let us pick your title? Let me ask you one question. What did you say when you left booking for the very first time? And like in unison, they all say, I'm never coming back here. So that's the title of the book. I'm never coming back here. Okay. And of course, they all say that while they're sitting in jail, you know?
Right.
And so it's a statement every person says when they get out of jail. So I wrote that first. Well, our sheriff read it, and he's a saved Baptist guy, and he asked if I'd be the chaplain at the jail. And so I'm doing that also, and they let me hire my son to be my assistant. So my 26-year-old son works with me in the jail. He's there 40 hours a week. I'm there a few days a week and oversee it. And then my daughter married a great guy. He's our youth director, just finished Bible college, and he's our youth director. And then my next daughter just finished Bible college, and she's back working with us. And then I've got 2 more sons. One's going to Bible college this year and graduated, and then one is going to wants to be a Christian businessman, and so he is building business and learning and influencing. So far, I got 5 graduate from high school. Next year I'll have 6, and so far they're doing good. As we know, who knows about tomorrow?
Well, you talk about wanting to be a Christian businessman. Dr. Greg Dixie at the Indianapolis Baptist Temple told me a story, and we were eating at Jonathan Bird's cafeteria. I
know it.
In Indianapolis. And he told me that when Jonathan Bird was a teenager, that he was a bus kid at the Baptist Temple.
Wow.
And that one Sunday morning during the invitation that Jonathan Bird came forward, and all the other kids would come forward, and God called him to be a missionary, God called him to preach, God called him to be a preacher's wife. Jonathan Bird came forward and said God called him to be a millionaire. And Dr. Dixon said, I didn't know what to do. He said, but he was one of our more excited bus kids. He said, so I just knelt down next to him and prayed that God would, bless him financially and, bless him with the character to have integrity in business and would be able to bless that integrity. And he said, and I never thought much about it. He said, that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
He said Jonathan Bird owns the cafeteria. He owns a chain of hotels. He owns a chain of Kentucky Fried Chicken stores. He said, and he probably carries about 2/3 of our church budget by himself.
That's amazing. Does he still go to church there?
He does.
Wow, that's amazing. A guy I was a chaplain for a health company when we were starting a new church. Jonathan Bird went through his health program and with his 88, with his race car, his Indy car, and they changed the number to 88 because of the health coach guy that I work with and put his name on it. So small world. That's incredible. Did not know that. And it's amazing, talking about bus ministry and people that were reached. That guy, that Christian businessman that I've worked for, he was reached at the Les Hobbins Church on a bus route as a teenager and got saved. So, yeah, just a small world, and to be able to do that, that's awesome. Yeah, it's the next book I'm putting out, and it's already written, working, edited. It's called Financing the Work of God, and it's amazing how much in the Bible God used and talked about business to finance His work. And usually, as preachers, we just talk about tithe and offering, and that's in the Bible, and that's right, and we believe that. But there is so much in the Bible about business. It's just amazing, and I think we skip over that so much. I'll ask preachers and pastors, say, okay, how many people has God called to pastor your church? They'll say, well, 1. Okay. So for your vision that God's called you to put together with your church, how many businessmen do you need to help fund the vision and the work that God's given you? So, man, dozens. Then why don't we teach that? Why don't we preach that? Why don't we give young men the opportunity to surrender, to be able to be a Christian businessman instead of forcing them to do something God didn't call them to do? We all ought to win souls. but God didn't call all of us to pastor churches, and so that's the next thing I want to teach and help people with. And yeah, it sounds foreign to some, but in the ministry, the biggest reason that's hindered us from doing bigger things for God are finances. It seems to had a good preacher friend, and he said, "Yep," and he always teaches, there are three things that veto any project, anything you want to do, and it said it's finances, faculty, and facilities. And I told him last time I respectfully disagree. It's only finances. Because if you have the finance, you can build the facilities.
Right.
And if you have the finance, you can hire the faculty. How many Christians would love to be full-time for God if they could just pay their bills? The faculty is not a problem. The finances are. Facilities aren't a problem. The finances are. And so I think we need more young men who could say, you know what, that's what I want to do, and help fund the work of God.
That principle is so true, not only in the ministry, in the work of the church, but also in our context of our works for the preservation of our Southern monuments and our Southern culture. The culture war is a whole. I know we do a lot of lobbying at Dixie Heritage. We would like to do a whole lot more. Right now, we're limited into what we can do based on what I have time for. And part of what I have time for is what I can afford to do. If I could lobby full time, I would probably do it. But obviously, I have other things that I need to be doing. I have a job that I need to work, a church that I need to pastor. And so I can't put myself into that effort full time. In other words, I cannot live in Washington, D.C. I cannot live in Tallahassee, Florida. But if we had the money, if we had benefactors, people who would support the work that we're doing, we could have a full-time lobbyist in Tallahassee, Florida, or a full-time lobbyist in Birmingham, Alabama, or a full-time lobbyist in Washington, D.C., people who every day, day in, day out, 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 5 and 6 days a week, all they would do is talking to members of Congress, talking to members of the state legislature, talking to members of the president's cabinet, talking to the state governor, talking to members of the governor's cabinet, and so forth, advocating for our monuments, advocating for our parks, advocating for our flags, advocating for our culture and for our history. And so the context is there. And believe me, I know people who are capable of doing the work and who would eagerly do the work. And right now they're working in other jobs. And you say, well, why are they working in other jobs and not doing this full time? Because they can't make a living at it full time. If we could pay them to lobby full time, they would do it. Just like there are people who I know, if we could pay them to do it full time, they would do other things to advocate our heritage as well. And of course, in the church that I pastor, I know we have people, very capable people, who would work there full time if we could just afford to pay them. And the only reason that they're out making a living somewhere else is because the money's not there. So that principle is very true. So if you've ever thought about being a benefactor of Dixie Heritage, please shoot us an email and let us know about that. We would love to speak to you. But right now we're going to break. We're going to have a word from another one of our sponsors, the American Free Press. And as soon as that is over, Dr. Baker is going to go into the heart of his book on child rearing, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how we can pass our culture and our faith on to the next generation.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Well, in your book, you talked about three things that we could do or that we should be doing to pass our faith down to our children. Why don't you give us those three things?
Sure. The first one I talk about is the tongue, and And it doesn't seem like that big a deal. I've asked a few hundred people, what do you think Solomon taught his son about more than any? And not one person has ever said tongue, and I would not have either. Almost 200 times Solomon taught his son about his tongue, his words, his mouth, his lips, his speech. And why is that such a big deal? Because James says if we can bridle the tongue, we can control the whole body. Well, we want our teenagers to control their bodies, but it starts with, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, please, thank you. Don't interrupt. Adults are talking, teaching them to control their tongue. We go out of our way, not to create words, but if a word is questionable or slang, then we say we don't say that word. And we're not saying other people are bad if they do, but for our children, we don't say any of these slang or off-color or vulgar words, and partly is we want to teach them to control their tongue. When you hear everybody say CRAP, and then you, in your mind, I don't say that word, then you have to fight that, because the Bible says we cannot but speak the things we've seen and heard. So there's a natural thing to repeat what we've heard. So when you in your mind have to go against that, okay, I hear this word, but I can't say this word, then you're building an inward character of controlling yourself. And it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but if you control your words, your tongue, then controlling the body is not a big deal. Now, my kids may mess up tomorrow. I've got two kids married. Both of them, their first kiss was at the altar with the person that they married. I've got two boys, 18 and 20. And neither of them have dated. They're good-looking kids. You can go look at our website. God's blessed with a beautiful wife, and I've got good-looking kids. But they've waited. They've waited. I got a daughter, 22, and she's been dated a few guys in Bible college, and none of them were the one. And she said, "I'm not settling. I want to wait for the one that God wants for me." And none of our kids dated in high school. We taught them that dating is preparation for marriage. You're not ready to get married yet, so really you don't need that pressure of this dating relationship. Be friendly with everybody and not have that pressure. We taught them, they accepted that, and it's been great for them. So that teach them to control their tongue is just a powerful thing to teach them to control their whole body. And so any slang, BUTT, and anything, we just say, okay, let's not say that, let's say this. There's a nice way to say that, and helping them with it. Not dogmatic, not hateful toward other people. Now, when they're little, they don't understand that. We had a Christian school at our church, and the teacher said a word, and one of our kids said, "Oh, you said a bad word," and it wasn't a bad word, but it wasn't a word that we allowed our kids to say. But that's been very helpful. A practical thing. And in the book, there's some practical things to help with the tongue. The second thing is wisdom. And wisdom is just so powerful. Wisdom, the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. With all thy getting, get understanding. For Solomon to have wisdom, for our kids to have wisdom. And so we've taught them from the time they were little to pray for wisdom. God, give me wisdom, give me wisdom, give me wisdom. The Bible says if we seek it early, God will give it to us. So early in life, early in the day, to be able to do that, teach them to walk with wise men. They'll be wise. To hear the reproofs of life. So many times children, and none of us really like to take correction, but we should. If we ought to love the person that corrects us. We want to be correct, right? We want to be right. So why shouldn't we want someone to correct us? When I'm writing something out, I want my wife to correct it. I don't want it to have bad English when it goes out. I want her to correct my English. So why shouldn't we want to be corrected in life? And so to teach our children to love wisdom, to love the reproof, to love the correction, and to pray for wisdom every day is just so powerful. And of course, with that comes the fool, to stay away from them, because a companion of fools will be destroyed. And that's the second chapter. And the third one is a conglomeration of warning of people. I was amazed at this, Dr. Ed, when I went through and saw how many people Solomon warned his son about. 13 different types of men Solomon warned his son about, and 8 different types of women. And he warned him about these people. And why is that such a big deal? Paul said, "Ye did run well, who hath hindered you that you should not obey the truth." It's not a what that messes our kids up. It's a who. It's not drugs that messes them up. It's the person that gave them the drugs. It's not alcohol that messed them up. It's the person that gave them the drugs. It's not false doctrine. It's the person that gave them the false doctrine. And so we are to warn our children from people that will mess them up. Make no friendship with an angry man. Okay, when you're around some kid and they're just angry all the time, friend, lead everybody, but you do not make friendship with him. He's going to get you in trouble. And so Solomon taught the principles of warning of people, and we don't do that today. We don't want to be judgmental. We're not saying they're bad, but boy, when we had a Christian school. It's a good school, good education, good teachers, good discipline, good standards, all that. But I was missing so much with our children. And my wife is amazing spirit. I wanted my girls to have her spirit. They were picking up negative, critical attitudes from the other girls in, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And it's like, well, that's not the way they were. That's not the way my wife is. And then our kids were so busy. My wife's piano teacher. My kids didn't have time to take piano lessons. And there's so many other things I wanted them to learn. So we pulled our kids out of our own Christian school, taught it, and explained it, what we're going to do. If they wanted to do it, they were fine. Some people could, some people couldn't. But it was one of the best things that we ever did to be able to make sure that our kids now, all of them play the piano, all of them have an extra instrument that they play. We have 4 cellists, 2 violinists, and other instruments, and they've got time for that. But also they've got to learn to do so many things. Our boys, 13-year-old, I taught him to change the brakes on a car. So now if the brakes, any of our vehicles need change, we pull in, he changes the brakes at 13 years old. And from construction to auto mechanics to woodworking, there's so many more things we got to teach them. And we were able to keep them from those kids that pulled them down. The oldest child we had the most struggle with because he had the most influence from people that weren't doing very well. The younger ones, it's amazing how easy it's been because the influence, and they're not socially awkward people. Oh no, homeschool, can they speak? Can they talk? They're not socially awkward. We're around people all the time, but it's been a blessing to be able to do that. But anyway, those are the 3 many things to get started: warning of people, wisdom, and to control the tongue.
Well, we talked about the tongue at the beginning of those 3. I remember in college, I can't remember, maybe it was Dr. Evans who used to always say that bless God was a, excuse me, it's in my throat. But he used to say that bless God was the Baptist cuss word. That's what we would say when we didn't want to cuss.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many at our Christian school back then. There was an element of people that took every curse word and changed a letter and called them Christian curse words, and they just rail on that. I mean, that we should stay so far away from that and so far from the world. It shouldn't sound like that. And now it's OMG and things like that are just no, that's God's holy, and not to do that and make a byword or abbreviation out of His name.
Well, I know with our 11-year-old right now, he's we're every day we're on to him. He's determined that his word is frick, F-R-I-C-K, frick.
Yes, that would be a banned word, absolutely.
I know too that in the South, of course, Southerners get this, and have you always lived in the South, except for when you were in college and in the Army, or were you from somewhere else?
I was born in Tennessee.
Okay.
We moved to Iowa when I was a kid. So I grew up Midwest Iowa. Went to the Army after that, then college, and then back to Tennessee. So lived in Tennessee most of my life, but the real formative years it was Midwest. So I don't have as strong of a Tennessee accent as most.
Okay, but you've lived in the South long enough to realize that bless your heart is not always a good thing.
Absolutely.
And I tried to make that point to some folks. I'll just call them Yankees.
Attend Bible College for free. Visit www.bibleschool.edu to find out how. Have you ever wanted to attend Bible college, but you couldn't leave your home? Or maybe you thought that the cost might be too high. Not anymore. The School of Biblical and Theological Studies is offering you the opportunity to enroll in an online class absolutely free. Enrolling in the free classes in no way obligates you to continue, and it will not obligate you in any way to ever have to pay a dime. Visit www.bibleschool.edu and start studying God's Word for free. That's www.bibleschool.edu.
And Dr. Ed, from here, what I tell people, and by the way, this book is still free. Amazon only let me do it free for 5 days, but on my website, you can go get the PDF for free. And that website is childrearinggodsway.com. childrearinggodsway.com. You can go get that book for free, and it's got some free gifts inside of it. There's one video that our family does, a family devotion. You ever want to see, hey, how do you guys do devotion? I'd be interested to see how any other family does devotion. We videoed just one of our devotions and went through what we do and teach on that. In the book, there's a link. You can get that as a free gift, and a couple other gifts. Our family sings together, and there's a couple songs. One's called Sheltered by His Grace. And boy, it's just a neat song. My kids sing it. And it talks about how, yes, my parents sheltered me, but they sheltered me from the broken heart and from the hurts and the wounds and the sin. And I'm so glad that they sheltered me from that. And my kids that feel that and sing that. There's some gifts in there. And then if somebody wants more, there's a video coaching program they can go into, and it's called Child Rearing God's Way. Years ago, I realized who was the best father in the world? God was. And so I need to rear my children like God rears us. And so I did a study of how God reared us, and have 5 videos that people can watch, and some couple free gifts with that. One is how to lovingly, biblically discipline our children. One of the things that I've seen worst of all is our discipline. By the way, Solomon, read Proverbs and see, that's one of the chapters in the big book, how many times Solomon taught his son about child rearing. We taught our children about child rearing all the time they were growing up, of what to do and how to do and why we're doing it, so they understand that. And Solomon taught his son about child rearing. So many times we take, as you know, the Bible out of context. Proverbs 31 is a perfect one. When you think of Proverbs 31, that's the women's group. That's the women's lesson. You teach it to women, and that's all it's used for. And that's totally not the context. Proverbs 31 is a mother teaching her son. Mm-hmm. She taught him, son, don't give your strength to women. Son, alcohol is not for you. Son, you speak up for the poor, the needy, and the dumb. You be the defender, not the bully. And then, son, here's how you find a good woman. And the rest of Proverbs 31. That's a mom teaching her son. And there's nothing wrong with teaching Proverbs 31, here's how to be a good woman. That's not the context of it. The context of it is, son, here's what you look for in a woman. But the discipline is such a big deal. I have 14 different steps on how to lovingly, biblically discipline our children. When I was a kid, it was, you wait till the commercial, kid. And then the commercial, then beat, and you come back and, what did that teach you? That TV show is more important than you are, how I deal with you, how I discipline you, and no love. It's just all discipline. And I have a great mom and dad, and that's the best they knew. When they've heard me teach this, they go, son, we're so sorry. We did the best. I don't blame you guys at all, but you want to take and how to purify. God, when he disciplines us, loves us and restores us and brings us back to himself. If we don't do that, there's a wall that's built up between us and our children, and we don't want that wall. So anyway, there's a lot of good stuff there to go into. If we can help you with children and child rearing, we'd love to, because as Dr. Ed and I were talking in the beginning, there's just a mess of things out there with our children, and so many parents are losing their kids, and our churches are losing their kids, and not realizing it doesn't have to happen. We can teach them the right things where they'll stay and do the right things.
You talked about standards and how to develop a standard. How do we go about explaining our standards to our children so that hopefully they become a conviction and not just a rule?
Right. I think it starts with the doctrine, with the Bible. The Bible is our authority of all matter in faith and practice. We say that. We need to believe that and live that. In the full child rearing book, one of the chapters talks about Solomon. He taught his son some amazing principles, but he didn't live it. Mm-hmm. Solomon taught his son about women, but he sure didn't live it. Okay. Right. He taught his son about so many things, but he didn't live it. And so the number one thing to answer your question is we teach them, but we teach them by our life. Dr. Evans, would say in college over and over, are your walk talks and your talk talks, but your walk talks louder than your talk talks. Mm-hmm. The dad that says, no, kid, you better not catch you smoking. It's gonna happen. And it's don't say this, don't do what I do what I say. No, they're going to do what you do. And so the best thing I can do is to live it in front of them and to show them an amazing, fun, exciting Christianity. My kids love being preacher's kids. They love the ministry. We went through some tough times. We lost a church building, and won't go through all that, but our kids have seen the bad side of ministry, and they still love God. They still want to serve God. They still want to do right. They still accepted what we taught them to be able to do, because the ministry is great, and serving God is great, and helping people is great, and they've got to see that. It's not a drudgery. It's not something bad to do. We don't complain about it. We've been through bad financial times. We've been without. I mean, you name it. We had a house foreclosed. Imagine 11 children, you lose your house.
Right.
Foreclosed, eviction notice. Hey, can we rent your house? Yeah. How many kids do you have? 11. Not going to go very well. But they've gotten to see God take care of us, and then God turn things around and do some great things for us. And they've gotten to see, hey, your God is real. And that's what I want. I want that too. So I think that's the number one thing. When we put on that form of godliness but deny the power thereof, when we just put on the actions, it's fight and cuss in the car all the way to church, and we get out, hello, good to see you, God, wonderful, to be real, to be the same at home, same at church, same there. And that's what our kids have seen. This is real. What Dad does, this is real. They care, it's real, and I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's probably the weakest thing many times.
I won't name names, but when I was a teenager, for a couple of Sundays, I had to ride to church with another young man in the youth department who was Brother Howell's grandnephew, and so we get into the van, and every Sunday it was the same thing. Was that Brother Howell's niece and grand nieces and nephews would get into this discussion about where their Bibles were. And, they could swear that, like after church Wednesday night, that they had left them under this seat, or that they had, no, maybe we brought them into the house, or.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And so.
Is it real?
Yeah, and
right.
I'm sure that they weren't the only family in the church that had those same discussions on Sunday morning as well.
Right.
But,
well, the world is real. The bright lights and flashing, it's real. It'll be empty, and it's a counterfeit. But boy, that's what so many people want to chase after. And the things we say, oh, don't do this, it's bad, and then they try it and it's fun. And I don't teach them that it's not fun. I teach them it's fun. There is pleasure in sin. The problem is it's only for a season. And after the season of pleasure is gone, now comes the season of consequences. And the consequences are way more than the pleasure is.
Right. Well, I know my grandfather used to say this often, and that was that our children will do in excess what we do in moderation.
Absolutely.
If you want your child to be a heavy drinker, just take a social drink every once in a while.
Yeah, great statement.
And
great statement.
You want your son to be lazy or to not be able to hold a job. Just call in sick one day when you're not.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Exactly. Yeah, there's lots to do, and I think we get so wrapped up in this world and making a living and functioning and all that. And I understand that, we've been there, but to do it with our children. One of the most important things I've done is you just mentioned, to work. And anytime when we lost our church building, I was a chaplain at a health company, a nursing care company before we started a new church, and they had a tree that fell down where their landscape guys couldn't get to it for a week. Well, it's in their parking lot. And so I told the administrator, I said, well, if you want to, I said, I'll get my boys and we'll move it. He goes, really, would you? I said, oh, I'd love to. Oh, okay, that's great. So I went home, got my 4 boys, and got the trailer and got the chainsaw, and we spent all day cutting up the tree. And he spoiled the kids, bought us a new chainsaw, paid us well, and I got to work with my kids and teach them how to work. Well, that turned into, they got the landscape contract, they planted the trees, they mowed, they installed the post, and so to teach our children how to work and give them opportunities to be able to work is such a big deal. Of course, Solomon taught his son about that: diligence, work, lazy, sluggard, all in Proverbs. But no matter what they do, if they can't work, they're not going to be a success at it. And so, we teach that preeminence. I didn't create this, but in work, this is such a good thing. You may have heard it. I sort of adjusted a little bit, but we have in our home, we teach our kids about work, and there's 4 different kinds of workers. Number 4 worker is someone, you tell them what to do and they won't do it. That's the number 4 worker, bad worker. Number 3 worker, you tell them what to do, they do it, and then you can't find them. Where did they go now? Okay, number 3 worker, bad worker. Number 2 worker, they do what they're told, and then they come back and say, now what do you need me to do? That's a good worker. They did what they're told, now what do you need me to do? But a number 1 worker is they do what they're told, but they don't have to be told. They look around to see what needs to be done. And that's in the big book also. And we teach our children, all right, walk into a room and look around what needs to be done. And to teach them to train an eye. I didn't know that. I didn't see that. Walk into the kitchen. What needs to be done? That number 1 worker. And we teach our kids, if you're number 1 worker, guess what you call them? You call them the boss, okay? Because they don't have to have a guide, overseer, or ruler like the ant. They'll just do what they're supposed to do. Nobody has to tell them what to do. That guy's going to be boss. And such a important principle to teach our children.
I believe it was your book that I read this in. And if it wasn't your book, you can still comment on it.
I'll take credit. I'm just kidding.
I believe it was your book that I read this in, and your book is the last book on child rearing that I had read. But I believe that in your book you made the statement that one of the mistakes that parents will make, especially if you have several children, is that you will teach the older children. And because the younger children will mimic the behavior of the older children, you don't work as hard or you don't put as much investment into teaching the younger children because their behavior is proper. So you don't really teach the younger children like you taught the older children. And as a result, then when the younger children get out of the home environment, they don't have the same foundation, and so they're not going to be as successful as adults, even though they had no discipline problems or behavioral problems as a child because you never really invested into them. Again, because you didn't feel like you had to, because they were doing all the right things, because probably they were just mimicking their older siblings, or that was just the culture of your home. And was that your book?
No, it wasn't, but that's a good point, and I have taught about that. In fact, I just taught about it last week, and in fact, the sermon is still up on my computer, and talking about that because the younger children in our home have needed way less discipline than the older children because a lot of the younger ones saw what Big Brother did, and that didn't work out well. I'm not going to do that. And so they have been a lot easier to be able to conform. This is what we do, the culture of our home. They don't fight the things that maybe the older ones did because this is just what we do and this is how we do it. And so I'm sure there would be a tendency not to make sure they know those same things. We talk about all the time with our kids different doctrine and purposes of why we do things and the principles behind it. It's not just the what, it's the why. You know, the Moses, God shows the works to the people, but the ways to Moses, and we want our kids to know the why, the why behind that. We want them to obey because we said obey. Now that you obey, let us teach you why that's important. And to be able to know that doctrine, that word of God, of why you're doing this. And if the kids are conforming to the culture, then they may not have gotten the doctrine there. Our youngest is 9, and so we have a long way to go to be able to see, like I said, the way you know if you did a good job is how much of what you taught your children are they teaching your grandchildren. We have 1 grandchild and 1 on the way, and all my kids love kids. We have gone around the kitchen table and say, all right, how many do you want to have? How many do you want to have? And knowing they have to have a partner for that, but we're going to have a lot of grandkids.
Yeah.
Dr. Ed, I've got another appointment that I've got to get to at the top of the hour. Would love to do this again. I've enjoyed this and making friendship with you, and who knows what God has. I'd love to see more of your ministry and what you're doing in the college and all those things. Just exciting to see you doing what God's called you to do and for us to make acquaintance and friendship.
Yes, sir. Well, would you give us the website one more time so people will know how to get your books and materials?
Sure. ChildRearingGodsWay.com is the child rearing book, ChildRearingGodsWay.com. And then the jail book and other things we're doing is at DavidMarkBaker.com. 1K, DavidMarkBaker.com. And to follow us, and if we can help you in any way, let us know. And Dr. Ed, sure enjoyed it. And comment again, I love the backdrop of the gun, and I need to put that in the back of mine. I love that. That puts the classic where it is. Here's Bible, here's books, there's good classic music, and here's the gun. So puts it all together. So amen. And you're in Florida. Where at?
In Ocala.
In Ocala. Okay.
Yes, sir.
We get down there. Would love to see you guys. And if you ever get up to the Sons of Confederacy up in Columbia, please stop in.
Yes, sir. Well, if you are ever headed this way, do make sure to let me know, and we'll host y'all for a few days.
Okay, that'd be great. Would love it.
All right. God bless, Brother Baker.
God bless, Jacques. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today's broadcast, and so that was the end of our interview with Dr. David Baker, author of a tremendous book on child raising, child training. I hope that you'll go to his website, www.childrearinggodsway.com, and avail yourself to a free copy of David's great book. I know that as a parent that I struggle with this every day, and I know that you as a parent and as a grandparent that you also struggle every day with the responsibility, the great responsibility of passing down our history and our heritage and our faith, our culture, godly character to our children and to our grandchildren. And so hopefully there's something in David's book that will help you. Hopefully there was something in our conversation today that will help you in that great task. Until next week, thank you for being a listener here at the Dixie Heritage Hour. And from all of us at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, we look forward to seeing you again next week. And until then, God bless.